Okay, panel, thank you so much for being here today. I'm in that slightly strange thing when I have to put my glasses on to read, but I can't see you if I've got them on. So there's going to be a lot of this. Bear with, bear with. I know a lot of you have empathy for that. Okay, so we've got such a great panel, such great expertise and research and experience in a variety of sectors. So I want them to explain something about themselves to you directly, if that's okay. So let's hear first, starting with you, Ollie.
Okay.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm a chemical engineer, and I lead the process and safety engineering team, a small consultancy in Aberdeen called Optimus Plus. And we work on everything from trying to solve some of the existing problems that offshore oil and gas platforms may face, to dealing with issues around strategy. So many of our clients are thinking about decommissioning strategy, compliance with North Sea transition deal strategies, or just what happens with decommissioning. And the other thing that we do is work with a number of startups who are trying to take their technology beyond the research stage of the technology readiness onto the deployment stage. And when I'm not doing that, I'm co-founder of a not-for-profit organization that I set up 17 years ago, looking at underrepresentation within the engineering space. And we work with everything from schools to universities, trying to address the underrepresentation of people, particularly from minority ethnic backgrounds, within the engineering space. So that's what I do.
Thank you, Ollie. There's a lot for us to mine there, all puns intended, which brings me nicely to Professor Paul Monks. Tell us a little bit more about what you're doing in your current work.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm Paul Monks. I'm the Chief Scientific Advisor at the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero. So we are the department in government that is in charge of energy security and net zero. So as it says on the tin. What's my role in the department? My role is to provide independent and impartial advice to ministers and senior officials, really about the application of science and engineering and the best understanding of science and engineering to policy development and delivery as part of that. I'm really fascinated, and one of the roles that I have in the department is thinking about our innovation portfolio and the way that we're developing our innovation portfolio. So I'm really happy to kind of be at Innovation Zero to get kind of fresh ideas around what innovation can achieve. Because for me, we have for 2030, 60–70% of the technology that we need, but for 2050, we have less than 50% of the technology that we need. So innovation is going to be the lifeblood of achieving net zero.
Thank you, and thank you for that framing. That's a very important way to think of it. Rebecca, on to you. Tell us a bit more about your work.
Will do. Welcome everyone. My name's Rebecca Sedler. I work at National Grid and I lead the Interconnectors business there. So National Grid owns and operates 8 gigawatts of transmission lines that connect into Europe. So I'm an energy and transmission geek through and through. Passionate about energy decarbonisation and equity underpinning it all. I'm also a big advocate of diversity and inclusion in the energy and decarbonisation sectors, and a mother of 3 kids, which drives a lot of my purpose.
Fantastic. Okay, well, it's all very well and good, isn't it, saying green industries and net zero rely on infrastructure, but what does infrastructure rely on? I do like that question. I like the way it's phrased. It's very philosophical. Rebecca, we're going to come to you first. We're going to start with energy. So as geopolitical events in recent years have demonstrated in kind of harsh reality, really, the notion of energy supply as it relates to net zero is becoming increasingly synonymous with energy security. Could you talk a little about the importance of network infrastructure to support the energy transition and how you're working with international partners?
Happy to do so. So I think there's been a huge amount of discussion already at these events about the importance of the network and the incredible amount of development we need to do to our network to speed up connections, to essentially extend out to places where there isn't the infrastructure existing today, so that we can add more generation vectors and we can essentially decarbonize the system. Alongside that, we have to extend the network to connect with other energy systems across Europe. So politically, we might not be a member of the European Union anymore, but we're still very much central to Europe's energy system. And I wouldn't say we rely on it, we partner in it, we collaborate, and consumers in both Europe and in the UK are stronger because of it. We have more resilient systems because of it. I'd say that we've all had a big jolt of energy insecurity because of the horrific invasion into Ukraine and the weaponization of gas. And the connection, particularly through grids, has shown what sensible energy partnerships and collaboration can bring. And particularly when you look at decarbonisation and the growth that we project with offshore wind and the inherent intermittency or variability with that, flexible grids provide complementary infrastructure to benefit the overall energy system. And so, we're very much pioneering growth and innovation in how we build out those grids, particularly in the North Sea, and realise the ambitions of the energy transition there.
And obviously, and you said there's been a lot of chat about this around this event over the last couple of days. These EU nations we're building connections with, we're obviously doing this in a post-Brexit landscape. That's how we usually phrase that, isn't it? So the value of this really supersedes politics, I guess, would you say?
Absolutely. I mean, if you just think about the time it takes from conception to operational delivery of the types of infrastructure projects that we're involved in. We've just launched Viking Link, which is the longest subsea inland cable actually in operation in the world, connecting the UK's energy grid to Denmark's. That project was 13 years from conception to delivery. So that kind of outtimes most energy ministers, a lot of political parties, a lot of leaders in the business that come and go. It's got to have a much more strategic lens on it. And the cooperation and collaboration involved, starts at a cultural level. It starts at the intent of the energy transition, at the drive for electrification, and a whole host of other kind of beliefs and that supersede almost policy development, but certainly political intervention.
Okay, I think it's always important to remember timescales that people are working on. Okay, just briefly, before we move on to Paul to talk about critical minerals, can you just clarify, you touch on the importance of overall system operability. What do you mean by that?
So I think it's very easy to talk about different parts of the energy system in quite binary terms. We need all wind or none at all. We need all nuclear or none at all. We have to build loads of transmission, or we don't want it at all in our communities. And actually, as we've seen, we need to take a whole system view. And that's very complex, particularly when there's been quite a lack of whole system strategic planning for a long time. And it's really pleasing to see the government, the regulator, and of course transmission companies go forward with centralised planning and spatial planning, committing ourselves to a longer time frame of investment, and understanding what the policy and the regulatory frameworks are required to deliver that investment, and hopefully from our perspective start to line up with much more longer term planning in Europe as well, because of course, as I said, we're part of an even bigger system. So yeah, I think that's the kind of view and commitment that's necessary to deliver this.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Gives us a great springboard. Paul, let's come to you. Can we talk a little bit more about both the UK's import strategy and our domestic strategy in relation to critical mineral supply, and also the strategy that you've been developing at DESNZ?
Thanks very much for that. So I think it's worth first taking a step back and saying, what are critical minerals? This is a session about clean infrastructure, and Rebecca's been talking about the need for clean infrastructure and a part of that. And critical minerals are, or materials, if I spread it out, are the materials that we're going to need for the transition. As we electrify, as we decarbonize, as we defossilize, we're going to need different supply chains to replace that. Classic examples, of course, are in electrification, and everybody in this room will know that you're going to need battery minerals such as lithium, cobalt, graphite, and the like as part of that. So as we decarbonize and our technology footprint changes, and our infrastructure demands more of those sort of materials, there's going to be some potential choke points, and that's the concept of critical minerals around that. The example I always give is in an electric vehicle, there is 11 kilometers of copper wire, where in a conventional vehicle, there's only 1 kilometer of copper wire. So you can see the amount of those different minerals that you're going to need. So why is that important? Well, one of the things that government's thinking about hard, it created a critical minerals strategy to think about what it needed to do to respond to that challenge in terms of clean infrastructure, of that changing kind of footprint of supply chains, if you want to call it that. And it came up with a strategy a few years ago, which was ACE. That is to accelerate the domestic capability, collaborate internationally, and enhance international standards and the like. So enhancing domestic supplies is encouraging things like mining. So in Cornwall, of course, there are a number of lithium companies coming to the fore. It's about R&D, it's about the circular economy. Collaborate internationally with international partners around helping UK companies, providing export finance, and making sure, and this is a really important piece, that we do it with the highest ESG standards that we can do, with responsible finance and with data and transparency as part of it.
Okay, there's so much stuff in there that I would like to pick up on. By the way, my great-grandfather was a tin miner from Cornwall. It feels like a stretch to imagine that industry building up and running again, but is that just a lack of imagination on my part?
No, I think that's fair. I mean, we will only get I think we will only get a certain proportion of our minerals from the UK. Of the critical minerals, we'll produce a little bit of the lithium, a little bit of the tungsten that we need, but we're not going to be able to meet the major growth in those sort of minerals. And that's the reason why, you know, we're talking about critical minerals and green infrastructure. We put out a task and finish group that industry put alongside, because we're trying to raise the awareness with industry. You've got to be all over your supply chains, because actually there are going to be potential crunch points in the future where we could slow growth if we don't have the right supply of those critical minerals.
Do you feel at the moment that critical minerals are still under-acknowledged in terms of the supply that we need to facilitate the net zero transition?
Well, I think if you look globally, you'd say the answer to that question is no. I mean, if you look at the IRA Act in the US, that's got a very strong critical minerals flavor to it. If you look at the recently passed EU Critical Raw Materials Act, which is putting rules of origin around that and those sort of supply chains, no, it isn't. I think what we found is that companies don't often think about where their supply chains are, and I think it's the scale of change that we're going to be coming to that is the real challenge.
Okay, there's so much I could ask you about that, but I'm mindful of time. So you said, you gave a very tantalizing example of copper wire before, how much is needed. Could you provide some other examples of the necessity of critical minerals in modern infrastructure and technology, and the extent of the shortfall at the moment?
Well, let's not go to the extent of shortfall, because the whole point of having a strategy and thinking about this is in order to avoid that shortfall. But as to Rebecca's point earlier, this industry is exactly the same as building interconnectors. From discovery to operational mining can be a decadal undertaking around that. But just to highlight some of the ones that are really critical to us, rare earth elements. They're the important things that go into the magnets of our offshore wind farms. You know, there's the silicon supplies that we need for the photovoltaic panels that we're going to need. There's obviously the battery minerals, and for all the electrification that's going to go through batteries, lithium, cobalt, nickel, etc. And there's a lot of work going on and R&D going on to reducing the amount of those minerals that we need in the next generation of batteries and moving to more available minerals as part of that. So that's a strategy, diversification. But there's a few examples of the importance of those sort of critical minerals. Never mind the aerospace industry and all the metals that they need as well.
So is the message, Paul, that we should chill out, not worry unduly, the strategy is developing?
No, it's the opposite.
Oh,
you shouldn't chill out. If you're in industry, you should be thinking about your supply chains. You should be thinking about the security of your supply chains. You should be looking that as your business changes and you're going to rely on more electrification, more batteries, etc. You understand those supply chains and you understand the resilience of those supply chains so that it is not a brake on the growth of your business.
Okay, amazing. Thank you very much. Ollie, let's come to you. Now, the research and work you've done points, I think I'm right in saying this, to the need for a patchwork of solutions. So let's talk about this a little bit. Can you elaborate on that? And do feel free to pick up on any of the key challenges that you've heard from Paul and Rebecca as well.
Yes, so when I think of the energy transition, I like an analogy that somebody used. He described it as a patchwork, like a patchwork rug of solutions. There's a tendency that when you listen to people talk about the energy transition from their the prism with which they're approaching it, they speak of it almost as if that is the only part of the solution that's important. But usually in my industry, and particularly with the company I work for, we are constantly, as I mentioned before, working with energy operators, how they can make the processing of oil and gas a lot more efficient, a lot less fuel intensive. We're constantly looking at ways of ensuring that we're reducing venting and running a lot more efficiently. And we're working with some of the small startups who have some of these solutions and are trying to bring them further up. But there are still many unanswered questions from our perspective. How do you achieve the solutions to direct air capture, for example, at scale? Pretty much all the models that have been looked at show that there is no pathway to this net zero solution that does not involve carbon capture to some extent. How do you achieve nuclear fusion, which has got to be one of the key parts of the solution? When it comes to these critical minerals, there are obviously pinch points, and countries that have a very strong monopoly, if you like, in terms of the processing of those industries. So one of the solutions to that is coming up with suitable alternative materials. And we've seen some of that. We worked with a company in Japan, for example, who have come up with a cotton-based battery as the cathode in their technology. But a lot of these are still at very small scale, and there's still some way towards getting to a point where, one, they can be demonstrated or deployed in a relevant environment and then become commercial. So how do we navigate all of those scenarios? And there are three areas that I think of. The first thing we need, I think, is much of this conversation is still happening. It's very much a technology conversation, but it isn't just a technological problem. And I think that there is something to do with, when we're thinking of the next generation of engineers and scientists, a better embedding of shape and STEM, so the humanities, and that aspect, which is often the context in which we decide what technology we go for, that's very important. The second thing that I think is very important is that I hear a lot of people having conversations almost in silos. I haven't seen too much of a connecting of the dots between all of these various efforts that are going on. And I think that unless we are at least coordinated to some extent, all we're doing is the equivalent of virtual signaling, everyone championing their aspect. And then the third aspect that I see is that we are having this conversation within our industry, and we could be doing a lot more to involve the public. So a few examples is my profession of chemical engineering came about because the French Academy of Sciences in the 19th century thought that the question of soda ash, the production of soda ash from common salt, was so important that they put up a prize. And the person who eventually came up with a process to solve it was a surgeon called Nicolas Leblanc. You have the problem of longitude in the 18th century, which is the biggest problem of its time, which was eventually solved not by the big sort of scientists of the day, but by a carpenter and self-taught watchmaker called John Harrison. And so we could be doing a lot more in terms of that engaging of the public and getting this better intersection, I think, between industry and culture. And we may then start to get towards a genuine solution.
Love the idea of a prize. Now I'm trying to think up names. If you have any names, do let us know. Okay, really, really interesting stuff, and I love the way that you approach some of these problems, Ollie. I'd like to just, while we have you here, talk about labour supply, because that's a part of the challenge that we said that we would focus on in this session. Yes. And it's obviously close to your heart as co-founder of AFBE-UK. How we're upskilling and diversifying the workforce, is it happening? What does industry and the wider public need to know about those challenges if we're being real about it?
Absolutely. So a lot of the changes that we are talking about that need to be had if we are to be on track for 2050 are happening within an imperfect context. So we already have a number of what I will call systemic fault lines, and whenever you've got a shaking, a lot of the tension will tend to happen along those existing fault lines. So one example of that is the fact that we have, for example, 1/3 of all UK domiciled undergraduate qualifiers in engineering are from a black and minority ethnic background. But if you look at the number according to Engineering UK, but if you look at the number that are in the industry, it's about 9%. There was a report published by Engineering UK just this week showing that there has been a drop in the number of girls actually getting into and being interested in STEM. So that is the context in which we are having this conversation. And I think that a huge part of the solution, it goes back to what I was saying at the start. If we make it just a science conversation and are not having enough of a connection between the people in this room and the public, then we don't get towards a solution. The second aspect of this is what our workplaces look like and how inclusive and how welcoming they are, so that we start to get more people interested in this. And over the last 17 years, we've certainly seen at AFBE people who we first met when they were in school who are now in the industry. And we've been running programs to try and get more people into STEM. So that's an important part of the solution.
Just very quickly, thank you, Ollie. Where are those, you said of the 1/3 of graduates coming through from the engineering, where are they? What happened to them?
So what happens quite often, I mean, there are multiple number of reasons why that is the case. There are issues around, obviously, recruitment. There are issues around where people choose to go to study their engineering, and huge disparity between the so-called Russell Group universities and a lot of the post-92 universities. But what happens, and I've seen this very practically, is that when people try to get into a sector and can't get in, they will pick up the next thing that comes along, and at that point, the industry has lost that person. So if people are aware, if employers are aware, for example, that there is a huge disparity between the number of people from minority ethnic backgrounds who attend Russell Group universities, it may encourage us just to look at the CVs a little more closely. And there needs to be that better connection, I think, between industry and between our academic institutions, so that people have a genuine insight into what the industry can give them, and so that we're better preparing students for the world of work.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Rebecca, how does this resonate with your talent pipeline work at National Grid? Because I know you do a lot on this. How do you make it more than the virtue signalling that Ollie has identified?
Yeah, I mean, National Grid faces a huge amount of growth year on year over the next decade, and the driving force behind that growth will be the people, which are undoubtedly our greatest resource. And so that means we need to drive in talent to the business at all levels, at junior apprentice, higher apprentice, through our graduate schemes, using our employee resource groups that we invest in heavily to appeal to more diverse groups. But I also think it's not just about attracting talent into the business, it's also about retaining the talent that you've got. I mean, if anyone here was thinking about having a job in National Grid, the first thing they do would be to chat to their mate's mate or someone they know who's worked at Grid or does now. So being able to offer a really decent employee proposition, create a culture which of high engagement, high inclusion for your existing workforce is where you also have to equally focus, and that's incredibly important to me as a leader of the business.
Yes, true. Paul, let's come to you. Is this something at a governmental level that DESNZ is trying to address?
There's 3 points I want to make about this. I want to pick up 2 points that Ollie just made, and then I'll talk about kind of green jobs. I think Ollie highlighted putting the net into net zero, as I call it. If there's a clear innovation challenge that's out there, we need to be putting the net into net zero around that. The second point that Ollie made, which I think kind of all segues this question about kind of skills and jobs, is this is a socio-economic technical problem. People use technology. Technology does not use itself. So that sense that we have to understand where the money comes from, that's important. But we have to understand that socio-economic and technical linkage as part of that, and put people at the heart of the transition, because if we don't, we won't make that transition as part of that. To the point that you asked me about green jobs and skills, it's interesting, the National Audit Office has just put out some statistics. Since 2020, the green jobs sector has grown by 20%. It's the fastest growing sector except for AI. In the UK. And it's really weird, and as Ollie said, a lot of people don't identify themselves as in green jobs. If you went out and probably typed green jobs into your favorite search engine, it wouldn't pop up. Yet it is a sector that is growing, and it's a sector that needs to grow actually quite quickly. And what we're doing in the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, along with our colleagues from the Department for Education and the Department for Work and Pensions, sorry about that word soup, is that we're looking at making sure that we've got that skills pipeline from level 2 at pre-apprenticeship all the way through to PhDs and the skills that we need, for example, in the nuclear industry as well. So that pipeline you need from pre-apprenticeship at level 2 all the way to those advanced skills. We need more welders, in order to do the transition. We need more heat pump engineers as part of that. So making sure you've got that skills pipeline all the through, and that it's an inclusive pipeline, I think is an important feature, and I know government is very focused on how to achieve that. And it's a pivot. It's not all about new money. It's about pivoting the skills that we've got and reskilling some of the people that we've got as well.
And Absolutely. Do we have enough things like apprenticeships for heat pump engineers? Yeah. Do we have enough of them?
Sorry, I missed that.
Do we have enough of them?
No, we do not have enough around that. And I think there's a challenge, and kind of Ollie mentioned it, a lot of people don't see themselves in these sorts of jobs. Yeah. So if you go to a 20-year-old and you say, are you really bothered about climate change? They'll go, yes, we're really bothered about climate change. Do you want a green job? They'll go, what does that mean? So there is, I think, a gap, and there's something for us to make it real to people and the real opportunity that's offered by that. And part of the reason I'm told why people don't see green jobs as a choice is they're not seen as a long-term option, because we talk about transition all the time. Yeah. So is this job actually going to last or not, is a question. Of course it's going to last. We're going to be building infrastructure for the next 20 years, if not longer, at a rate we've never built it. So yes, clearly these jobs are going to last.
Ollie, is there anything you want to add? You're shaking your head vigorously.
That's right. The other aspect of this is we think about entry-level skills. I've worked on sort of numerous sites over the years, and I've come across many, I'll call them operators, plant operators, people who have been in the industry for many years, and I often describe them as engineers without a certificate, because when it comes to the actual know-how, many of these people have skills. But when I hear people talk about the energy transition, particularly with the increase in automation that we expect will come alongside that, very rarely are the skills that these workers will need in order to have what we're referring to as a just transition into other industries. Those sort of skills, I don't see that being championed at a high enough level where everyone knows that this is accessible. So when it comes to the investment, there is a huge investment gap, I think, in a lot of the current workforce within the sector. And I think if we can invest in that, many of those people will become the sort of workers and the champions who would then help us meet the targets.
I agree.
Thank you for spending a bit of time on that subject with some very kind of important insight. We sort of set out quite a grand stall at the start of this, so I'm unfortunately got to move on to another topic as we're on in the last few minutes. I want to move on to innovation, and I'm kind of interested to know from all of you actually, is there anything that you would like to highlight or showcase in terms of innovation? Anything that's of real value to your institution, and what do you look for, and what do you describe as innovation? Rebecca, let's start with you in National Grid.
I think that one of the main areas of innovation that our business is involved in is bringing together different infrastructure classes. So traditionally we have built transmission as big lines and international transmission like interconnectors, just onshore converter stations with huge cables in between. Obviously, these coastal communities are increasingly going to be housing the landing points for offshore wind and perhaps in the future hydrogen. And so as we're developing the next stage of interconnectors, we're looking more to create offshore hybrid assets that connect different infrastructure such as offshore wind and interconnectors together, thereby using the infrastructure at a lower cost, being more efficient with very expensive things like cables and converters, but also thinking carefully about the communities that house that infrastructure so that we are as gentle on them as we can be. So that's an area that we're innovating, not just technically with the kit, but also writing the policy and regulatory frameworks that will enable these investments to happen.
Thank you very much for that. Paul, is there anything that you'd like to spotlight?
So I think why innovation in the net zero transition? We need to do it quickly. Innovation for tomorrow is what we need. And we need to do two things. We need to roll out and scale up the technology that we have today. We have much of the technology that we need in some of the areas, and we need to scale that up and roll it out. And we need to look at the areas, like the area I said earlier, putting the net into net zero and decarbonisation and negative emissions, as it's called. We're going to need that in the futures. We've got innovation to do in the hardest to decarbonise sectors. We're setting carbon budget 7 at the moment. We'll remove 78% of the emissions from the atmosphere by that stage. It's going to be really hard to do. We're going to need innovation to remove that last 30%. It's going to be the most difficult 30% to remove. Concrete, steel, aviation, heavy shipping, and we're going to have to decarbonise the sectors that we've already got. But remember, 2050 is not a finishing line. We don't bust through the tape and we haven't won. We're going to need to innovate beyond that to stay where we are and carry on the challenge. Thank you.
Thank you. Carbon budget 7, that's a toughie, isn't it?
Yes.
Oh, let's not go there right now. Ollie.
Yes, so I'm going to use the opportunity to champion the type of organisation that I work for, the SMEs. Quite a lot of the startup companies that come up with these innovations, most people in this room will know that they go through 3 broad stages: a research stage where they prove the concept, development where they scale it up, and deployment in a relevant environment before it enters the market. Now, we, organizations like ours, try to help the organizations between TRL4 and TRL6, which is the point between research and deployment. And usually, it feels like a labor of love quite often because the funding available to actually be able to support these robustly isn't there. Now, if you can't scale up a technology, if you can't, you never get to a point where it can get deployed. And so greater support for the SMEs who play a very important role in that development is hugely important. And then I'll come back to the cohesion point, which is that if there needs to be somebody looking at how this all ties together, and at the moment I don't see it to a sufficient degree.
Okay, thank you. And staying with you then, Ollie, on that note, this is my little roundup question. If you have a specific call to action you want to convey to other stakeholders upon whom we're sort of dependent, be that investors, international collaborators, policymakers, regulators, or big global companies, what is the key message you would like to leave with this audience?
The key message I'd like to leave is the solution is actually amongst all of us. So if the more inclusive the conversation is, the likelier we are to find the proper solutions. That's what we've always done, and that's what we'll do in the future.
Thank you. Rebecca, what key message would you like to leave here?
I think net zero, the energy transition, is for some reason becoming increasingly combative. I'd really encourage us all to embrace a more collaborative tone when we're having these debates, whether it be about technology choice, policy, regulatory frameworks. Collaboration is what's going to lead us to better solutions.
Thank you. Well, I hope you didn't find this session combative. I found it really energizing. I don't know about you. You're still here, which is great. Can we have a round of applause, please, for our panelists? I thoroughly enjoyed that. Thank you very much, guys. I'm going to allow you to leave. Ollie, Paul, and Rebecca, thank you very much. Allow you to leave
Ollie.
as if I'm your keeper. Thank you.